The flight attendant's smirk disappeared the second Elon Musk made one phone call. The revenge was more brutal than anyone could have imagined. Imagine boarding a first-class flight, settling into the plush leather seat that cost more than some people's monthly rent. The ambient lighting casting a soft glow across the cabin as the hum of the engines promises a smooth journey ahead. You're just about to sip your complimentary champagne when suddenly a flight attendant appears at your side with a tight, practiced smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. "Sir," she says in a tone dripping with false politeness, "I'm afraid there's been a mistake with your seating assignment. We'll need you to gather your belongings and move to economy immediately." The audacity of the request would be shocking enough for any passenger. But what if you were Elon Musk, not just any billionaire, but the visionary behind Tesla, SpaceX, and the owner of the very airline you're flying on? This isn't some hypothetical scenario or fictional drama. This actually happened in real life, and the fallout was more explosive than anyone could have predicted. The question isn't just how such a brazen act of disrespect could occur, but what dark undercurrents of prejudice and power dynamics led to this moment, and why the consequences would send shockwaves through the entire aviation industry. The stage was set on a seemingly ordinary flight from Los Angeles to Austin, where Elon Musk, dressed in his trademark understated billionaire casual, a fitted black Tesla t-shirt, designer sunglasses perched on his nose despite the dim cabin lighting, and a sleek leather laptop bag slung effortlessly over one shoulder, guided his wide-eyed 4-year-old son X through the first-class cabin. The boy clutched a meticulously detailed SpaceX rocket model in his small hands, his face alight with the kind of pure, unbridled joy that only children seem capable of experiencing during travel. To the other first-class passengers, a mix of Silicon Valley executives, Hollywood producers, and old-money heirs, the scene was almost charming in its normalcy. Just a father and son enjoying a rare moment of leisure together. But beneath this veneer of ordinary travel lay a tension so thick it was nearly palpable. Flight attendant Sophie Miller, a 12-year veteran of the airline with a reputation for being by the book to the point of absurdity, watched the pair from her station in the galley, her sharp eyes tracking their every move with unsettling intensity. When she finally approached, her crisp uniform perfectly pressed and her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun, there was something in her posture, a barely perceptible stiffness, that suggested this was no routine interaction. "Sir," she began in a voice that managed to be both honey-sweet and razor-sharp simultaneously, "may I verify your boarding passes?" The request itself was standard, but the way her fingers twitched as Musk handed over his phone, the way her eyes lingered just a beat too long on the digital tickets, the way her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line, it all spoke volumes. She recognized him immediately, of course. Not just as Elon Musk, the tech billionaire, but as Elon Musk, the controversial public figure whose political donations and unfiltered tweets had made him persona non grata in certain circles. And in that moment, something dangerous clicked into place in Sophie's mind. Here was a chance to make a stand, to put one of them in their place. The temperature in the first-class cabin seemed to drop several degrees when Sophie uttered the words, "I'm sorry, sir, but there appears to be an issue with your seating assignment." Nearby passengers who had been engrossed in their pre-flight rituals, typing furiously on laptops, sipping mimosas, flipping through in-flight magazines, now looked up with undisguised curiosity. Musk, who had spent decades dealing with everything from hostile boardrooms to congressional hearings, didn't so much as blink. He simply tilted his head slightly, his piercing gaze locking onto Sophie's with the intensity of a predator assessing its prey. "An issue," he repeated, his voice deceptively calm, each syllable carefully measured. The flight attendant's fingers tightened imperceptibly around the tablet in her hands, her knuckles whitening with the pressure. "Yes, sir," she continued, her voice taking on that particular brand of customer service condescension that's somehow more infuriating than outright rudeness. "We'll need to relocate you and your son to economy while we sort this out." The sheer audacity of the demand hung in the air like a physical presence. Little X, sensing the sudden tension, looked up from his rocket model with wide, confused eyes. "Daddy," he whispered, his small voice cutting through the thick silence. Musk placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder without breaking eye contact with Sophie. "On what grounds are you asking us to move?" he asked, each word deliberate. Weighted with unspoken authority, Sophie's carefully constructed facade of professionalism cracked ever so slightly, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, the faintest tremor in her hands. "It's standard procedure, sir," she stammered, the lie tasting bitter on her tongue. But the truth was glaringly obvious to everyone present. This wasn't about procedure, wasn't about overbooking, wasn't about any legitimate airline policy. This was personal. This was about Sophie's own deep-seated resentment toward Musk's politics, his wealth, his refusal to conform to the unwritten rules of elite society. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known in that moment, was that she wasn't just challenging another first-class passenger. She was challenging the majority shareholder of the entire airline. And with a single, almost imperceptible, tap on his phone, Musk set in motion a chain of events that would leave Sophie's career in ashes and force the entire aviation industry to confront its deepest, darkest biases. By the time the plane's wheels touched down in Austin, the incident had already metastasized into a full-blown corporate crisis. Musk, never one to suffer fools gladly, had discreetly alerted his legal team mid-flight, and by the time the seatbelt signs were turned off, the airline's CEO was already fielding frantic calls from board members and major investors. The public apology issued within hours was a masterpiece of corporate groveling, all the usual buzzwords about unacceptable behavior and commitment to customer service excellence deployed with military precision. But it was too little, too late. Sophie, meanwhile, found herself summoned to a windowless conference room where a panel of stone-faced executives waited with the grim demeanor of a firing squad. The tablet they slid across the table to her displayed a Twitter feed exploding with outrage. Boycott. The airline was trending globally. Conservative pundits were howling about liberal intolerance, and business analysts were already calculating the potential stock price impact. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" the head of HR hissed, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. Sophie, her once perfect posture now collapsed in on itself like a deflated balloon, could only stare mutely at the screen. She had thought, truly believed, that she was making some grand moral stand against privilege and inequality. Instead, she had become the unwitting face of everything wrong with modern service culture. The unchecked biases, the performative wokeness, the petty abuses of minuscule power. Musk, meanwhile, was already several moves ahead on the chessboard. His demands, delivered through a team of high-powered attorneys, were non-negotiable. Mandatory unconscious bias training for all customer-facing staff, third-party audits of all passenger interaction protocols, and the immediate termination of everyone involved in the incident. The airline, desperate to stanch the bleeding, agreed to everything before the sun had set on the day of the incident. But for Sophie, there would be no redemption arc, no second chances. Her termination letter arrived via email before she'd even finished clearing out her locker, the cold corporate language a stark contrast to the passionate beliefs that had led her to this moment. As she walked out of the airport for the last time, her security badge deactivated and her future uncertain, a single thought played on loop in her mind. How could I have been so blind? This story isn't just about one flight attendant's catastrophic misjudgment or one billionaire's ability to exact revenge with surgical precision. It's a microcosm of the cultural civil war raging across America. A war fought not with guns and bombs, but with social media outrage, corporate policies, and the quiet daily judgments we pass on one another. Sophie acted on what she believed were noble impulses, convinced she was striking a blow against the inequities of the world. But in doing so, she revealed the uncomfortable truth about human nature. Our principles are often just prejudices dressed up in moral language. Our convictions, frequently nothing more than rationalizations for our biases. Musk, for all his wealth and influence, became in this moment something far more powerful than just another angry customer. He became a living, breathing symbol of accountability in an era where consequences are increasingly rare for those with the right connections. The question now isn't whether Sophie deserved what happened to her, but whether this incident represents genuine progress or just another example of power flexing its muscles. Can systemic change ever come from isolated incidents like this? Or do they simply reinforce existing hierarchies in new ways? And perhaps most disturbingly, would the outcome have been different if the passenger had been someone without Musk's resources or platform? The uncomfortable truth may be that in our current system, justice is still largely a commodity available only to those who can afford it. But maybe, just maybe, this very public, very messy confrontation will spark the kind of soul-searching the service industry so desperately needs.